Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session, being produced by the Royal Television Society in partnership with a film and TV charity. My name is Connor Dignam. I'm the host of this panel. I'm also the CEO of Media Business Insight, which is the publisher of the industry titles Broadcast and Screen International. And obviously, we're writing an enormous amount about this area at the moment. We're here to discuss the recent publication of the film and TV charities Looking Glass 21 survey, which looked at the mental health and well-being of people working in TV. The results of that survey continue to make hard reading for the UK's TV and film industry and those that lead it, although there are clearly some positives to take out of it and signs of progress being made in some areas. We're going to have a discussion about some of its key findings and the work going on in the industry to improve mental health. And we're also going to open up to questions from people watching this webinar. So you can send your questions in for the panel just through the Q&A. And we'll try to respond to as many of those as we can towards the end of the session. So let me briefly introduce today's panel. We're joined by Alex Pumphrey, CEO of the film and TV charity, which is playing a key role in this industry debate through various initiatives, including the Looking Glass survey and Let's Reset campaign. Philippa Childs, who's head of Bectu, the trade union that represents more than 40,000 people working in the UK creative sector. Alicia Dalrymple, who is a junior production manager at Dragonfly and is also a Channel 4 production scheme alumni. And Lucinda Hicks, CEO of Banijay, one of the UK's largest independent production groups, with more than 20 labels within the group and shows that range from location to Peaky Blinders to Ambulance. So thank you all to the panel for joining us today. And before we hear from the panel, Alex Pumphrey is going to help set up by just talking about some of the key findings from the Looking Glass survey. So over to you, please, Alex.
Thanks, Connor, and hi, everyone. It's lovely to be with you. Thank you for making time over your or just after your lunch break. The Looking Glass is now acting as a longitudinal tracker, which is monitoring the industry's progress on measures of well-being, of working conditions, culture, and support that's available to people working within the industry. So we ran the first survey in 2019. And at its heart, it is a survey, but we also conduct some qualitative work around the survey to give us a complete picture of what's going on in the industry. We ran it again in the summer of last year, 2 years on, to help us understand what had moved through and after COVID. And you can see the full report at the link I provided at the bottom of the screen. The report itself is still quite short, but we're really happy to dig into the data. So I just wanted to say, if there's anyone who has further questions on the report of the data, has further cuts of the data that they would like us to be able to run, then we're very happy to do that. Please do get in touch with us, and David Steele in our research department will be happy to speak to you about that. But what you see on the screen now is some of the headlines that I wanted to use just to kick off the conversation today. What we found in 2021 was certainly some notes of optimism, as Connor said. So our mental health and wellbeing scores within the industry were pretty stable in 2021 versus 2019. And that's actually something of an achievement, given that, as I'm sure everyone's aware, through the pandemic, the society as a whole, well-being had suffered greatly, and across society, many of those measures had gone down. So for us to maintain those level was actually pretty good news. And the other thing we heard when we were speaking to people was a real sense that mental health now is firmly on the industry's agenda. So it is being talked about. We are having more open conversations about mental health and well-being. And a belief, I think a really emerging belief that things can and will change. But I think the flip side of that is there's, I would say, sort of healthy degree of skepticism that the industry really needs to walk the talk as well. So it's not obviously just enough to talk about mental health and well-being. You've actually got to take action. You've got to put in place real structures and support that can improve people's mental health and well-being. So that's where I think the conversation is going to next, is sort of what's the real tangible action that the industry is going to take. It's saying the right things, but what's it actually going to do? As Colin said, I mean, a lot of the findings, however, are quite difficult reading. Certainly, many aspects of culture within the industry remain really problematic. So we see these really high levels of bullying, harassment and discrimination within the industry, with 57 people saying that they'd experienced some form of bullying or harassment, and 67 people saying that they'd witnessed it. So that's more than half. And that was within the past year. So more than half of people working within the industry had those sorts of experiences within the past year. And 4 in 10 of our Black, Asian, minority ethnic respondents to the survey had experienced racism, racial harassment or discrimination. And all of those things have very clear correlations with mental health and well-being. Racism, sexual harassment and bullying in particular have really strong correlations with poor mental health and well-being outcomes. Another worrying aspect behind that was, although we know that there are better reporting mechanisms for those sorts of experiences, there is a lack of trust in those reporting mechanisms. So only 1 in 10 people who had reported that sort of experience said that things had got better as a result. Actually, more said that things had got worse as a result. And by far the majority said it hadn't changed things either way. So that's an area of concern. And given all of that, it's perhaps not surprising that only 10% of people said that they felt the industry overall was a mentally healthy place to work. There are lots of implications that flow from that, but one that I wanted to particularly highlight is what I think the industry faces in terms of a significant retention risk. Now, we know that demand for talent is higher than ever, so it seems really imperative that we can keep our brilliant talent within the industry even before we look at how we attract new talent into the industry. Work intensity is absolutely through the roof. Those of you working in production will obviously know that. We've got 39% of people are working 50 plus hours a week. That's in excess of the European Working Time Directive. So that's 4 in 10 people in the industry working in excess of the European Working Time Directive. 1 in 6 are working more than 60 hours a week. 6% of people are working 70 hours plus a week. I spoke to someone last night who said she's now working 6.5 days a week and she doesn't see any let up for the next 2 to 3 years. So that work intensity is clearly having significant impacts on mental health, and that translates into propensity to leave the industry as well. So we see that 2/3 of people who responded to that survey last summer said that they've considered leaving the industry specifically due to concerns about their mental health. And we feel really clear that retention is a diversity issue because that propensity to leave over indexes for underrepresented groups. And one very notable aspect of that is that 3/4 of disabled respondents to our survey, 74%, said that they considered leaving the industry in the last year because of concerns about their mental health. So I'll leave it there, Connor, I think, just to sort of, hopefully that provides some stimulus to get the conversation started.
No, that's great, Alex. Thanks. And I think that's 2,000 people, Alex, as well, isn't it, in that survey? So it's a pretty significant chunk of the working.
It's a robust survey. I mean, it gets more challenging when you try to cut down different subsectors and different demographics. So we're always very careful to only report what we know is statistically sound, but everything I've shared with you there is,
Okay, so thank you. So there's a lot to cover there. And what we're going to try and do is kind of take it in areas. And I think we wanted to start off talking about the mental health impact of COVID and work. I mean, we've all experienced this, where you can tell, but we're on a webinar all in our homes largely. But it's obviously been very acute for those people at the sharp end of producing shows and delivering shows. And Alicia, if I could start with you, you're very much there on the coalface doing that. And I just wanted to ask you about your experience of working with the protocols around COVID and how that had impacted people in production. And it's clearly a significant factor here.
Working with COVID is obviously added an additional work layer where we have to obviously abide by government's protocols, and then sometimes it might be the services protocols, and that additional work layer, if we're looking at like hours in a week, that's literally, that could be 5 hours, an additional 5 hours a week looking at it. So it's understandable that it has added more pressure, and then obviously it's added more pressure on crew as well, because they have an additional responsibility of like testing, making sure, you know, obviously they have other things to do as well, and it could sometimes the jobs are really full on, and it's made production just a bit more isolating, which obviously, particularly if you work on like heavy shows, it can have an effect, you know, like morale can go down, and you know, people are just, their well-being is just general, like you have to stay in your cohort or you don't mix with anybody.
Yeah, and I suppose it's the same as every aspect of this. The longer it's gone on, the harder it's been in many respects. It's gone on for quite a long time, I think, more than any of us would. It's obviously beginning to change, Alicia, in terms of the requirements and the restrictions around production, just as it is with everything else. Do you see it getting any better? I mean, is it changing again in the sort of reality of production at the moment?
At the moment, it is changing slightly, but I think it will always depend on the type of production that you work on. You know, there's some productions where they've done like villages where, you know, so hopefully nobody would get infected with COVID. And then obviously there's shows that work with like vulnerable patients. So it would have to be on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and that makes complete sense. Yeah. And then I suppose the question for the production community is: I begin to see changes in, and again, maybe I could turn to you, Lucinda, on this. As you know, one of the biggest employers, are you beginning to see with your group companies changes in the requirements that you're asking crews and teams to work under?
Yeah, I mean, slightly, and I think things will improve as the restrictions and protocols relax a bit. But I also think we've got to be realistic about how fast that's going to happen, and to what extent. I mean, none of us know. None of us have known the whole way through this pandemic. I think in some ways that's been the hardest thing, is just the not knowing. I mean, if someone had said to us back in March of 2020, 2 years on, we'd still be talking about it, I think we would have all, sort of felt a hell of a lot worse throughout the whole thing than we have. And I think that is going to continue for a while. And I think, to Alicia's point, I think one of the things that people find really hard is that the restrictions on production are more restrictive than those in wider society as well. So people sort of it feels like this really unjustified sense of sort of bureaucracy and dictatorial sort of standards that we all know why they're there. I mean, everybody on production understands why they're there, and people are amazing at following them. But it's really hard when you've got friends outside the industry going about their daily lives in what feels like a very normal way, and you're stuck in a production bubble. You haven't seen your family for weeks and weeks on end. You can't socialize. And the schedules are even longer than they were, and so it is really tough. And so I don't think we should be unrealistic about how long a portion of that's going to continue for a bit. But we are beginning to, we're heading in the right direction, right? So we've got to feel positive about that.
And I mean, ultimately, the UK production sector has been massively aided by these protocols, because people were able to get back to work and doing things earlier than we at first thought, and it's allowed people to stay in their jobs and keep shows and films being made. So it's a difficult balancing act, isn't it?
And I think the adjustment for people, I mean, there were a lot of people who weren't working for a prolonged period at the beginning of the pandemic, and to suddenly then launch in and not just go back to a job that was familiar, but a job that was didn't actually resemble much of what they were doing before, and certainly isn't the reason that they got into TV. And a lot of people were sort of let's be honest, making it up, as we were all making it up as we went along at the beginning. So the way that a lot of people re-entered wasn't that gentle reintroduction to work, but a really full-on and really intense way. And I think we're still feeling the effects of that as well.
And what about mental health support for those production teams and people generally in the industry? I mean, if I go back to you, Alicia, do you feel like there's been more structure built? I think we all, I mean, we're a business with 80 people. We're very deadline driven. Lots of deadlines and pressure of delivery. We've tried to put things in place. You always feel as an employer and a business you can do more, but we've tried to put. But do you feel, Alicia, that there is more support for people working in production around these kind of mental health issues?
I do feel that there is a definite incentive for the help. So like people being more open, companies having like mental health first aiders, even just like general chats, like a buddy up on productions where, you know, you have like 1 or 2 people that you like check in with, see how they're doing. So yes, I do, but also probably I think it comes down to how open and how comfortable people feel in terms of like approaching somebody and raising something.
Yeah, you need to have the support structures there or support there, and then you need to encourage people to use it, I suppose, don't you? And that's and again, I mean, you know, Alex, do you think that's coming through from the survey in a sense that your people have recognised that there may be more, is that there is more there? It's a question of being supported to access it.
Yeah, I think that is true, and what Alicia says really certainly resonates with what we've seen in those findings. Is, you know, I think by and large, people are seeing that there are routes to report, routes to support and routes to report bad experiences being put in place, but there is a lack of what's known as psychological safety. So, you know, comfort and trust, and sometimes just understanding of what those. And in a freelance industry, it's completely understandable that individuals will be very concerned about any repercussions for their future work and their reputation. And we still, you know, we will have people phoning us and saying, oh, well, you know, we don't want to tell you, I don't want to tell you what my name is because, you know, it could get back to my employer. Now, we are completely independent and everything we deal with is entirely confidential, but I think that's just a sort of an indicator of the level of anxiety and fear that there is out there about the repercussions of being able to speak up about what's happening to you.
Yeah, I completely. You in a normal workplace where you have a full-time permanent job, I think there's a you know, people will still be concerned about these things. In a workplace where you are on a fixed-term contract, you know, that must be an enormous amount more pressure to actually raise. So Philippa, perhaps I can ask you on that question, because I think looking at this survey and looking at the kind of debate that's been going on in the industry, there is a question about whether structurally there's just this kind of inequality built into the TV and film industry where freelancers and people on short-term contracts are always going to, you know, be getting the bad end of things. And, you know, what's your take on that? Is it a structural problem, and are we always going to have it because of the nature of employment?
I mean, I think it is a structural problem, as you say. If you're an employee, there's still a power imbalance there, but you probably feel more comfortable in terms of raising these issues. I think having power around your working environment is hugely important in terms of good mental health. And so I think, you know, the project nature of the industry does sort of lend itself to you know, the sort of long hours culture, the people feeling like they just don't have any control on a day-to-day basis. They don't have the same ability to be able to sort of take time off and go and watch a school play or something that people do in other workplaces. So I do think there is something about the structure of the industry. But having said that, I don't think it's a problem that needs to be insurmountable. I think if the industry wants to do better in this respect, and I think we all agree that it should, then I think there are things that can be put in place that we can all work together to make a better environment, and actually to start turning around some of these statistics. But undoubtedly, people are more concerned about reporting because they feel more vulnerable in a freelance environment, for sure.
And what are some of those things then, Philippa, you kind of mentioned there? Things that, I mean, back to your point, Alex, about people wanting things to be done now. You have had the conversation. We know what the issues are. What are some of the things that can be done or should be done or are being done, Philippa, that you think can redress some of that kind of imbalance?
Yeah, so I think there's lots of really good work and lots of good collaboration across the industry to try to put in place support mechanisms, to try to signpost people to support services. And obviously I would say join a union. That's the best way of getting some support. But I think there's an awful lot of good work going on. I think things like the wellbeing facilitators that are appearing on some productions and some broadcasters have committed to is a really positive thing. There's all the resources that the film and TV charity provide, the helpline and so on. So I think there's an awful lot of goodwill and positivity. But clearly there is still an awful lot of work to do to start to turn around some of these statistics. And, you know, bear in mind that these statistics are saying there is a real problem. And as Alex highlights, if you are someone who's disabled, or if you're someone who's Black and found it difficult to break into the industry anyway, you're going to feel even more isolated and even more vulnerable in that respect. So there's huge amounts to do.
Okay, so Lucinda, perhaps we could pick a couple of those things up. I mean, we do a broadcast does a best places to work survey, and a lot of indies enter it. And we did an event the other week where we brought all those indies together who had kind of, with best places to work. And one of the people speaking at that event said that they were looking at moving more to both longer term contracts for people. That was one of the things that they thought they needed to do in order to give people more security and build more confidence, and probably just build more infrastructure in their own business. But I just wondered, as again, one of the biggest indie employers as a group in the country, what's your sense of that? And do you think that there will be changes in how people are employed?
I think it's horses for courses to a certain extent, and there are a lot of benefits as well to the freelance setup, as we've said, and some people really like that ability to move around. So I think it's about understanding what different each individual wants, and sometimes that might vary by your ethnic group or your socioeconomic group or the genre that you're working in, the level of seniority. I mean, there are all different ways that you could cut it. So I think groups like ours are trying to address that. I mean, we have a high potential scheme where we do offer people a 12-month contract. It's focused on people from ethnically diverse backgrounds. For those people for whom it does feel like a barrier to not have a long-term commitment. Some people just don't feel like that though. And we can offer it because of the scale of the group and the fact that we can move people around to different productions. But like I say, it doesn't appeal to everybody. I think ultimately people, at the end of the day, do want to work in a place where they feel that the projects are the most interesting, they're going to learn the most on it, and they're going to be happy and be treated well. So above all else, I think it's about things like kickoff meetings where you emphasize the importance of the right behavior on set and what you expect of people, making sure everyone understands the different routes of raising issues and the access that they've got to an HR department or a third party in some cases as well. But I also understand that for some people, even though it's an HR department, and I know our HR department, and they're amazing and they're brilliant, they are still strangers to to freelancers who've only just started on a role. And I think the other thing that we're trying to do is to get almost make everybody accountable on the set, and everybody understands what is and what isn't acceptable, and try and encourage things to be tackled at a sort of a lower level rather than the escalation process, which is absolutely necessary and it absolutely needs to be there. But that in itself can feel really intimidating if you do need to escalate something, and it's suddenly you've got all of these senior parties of people involved that you don't know. So yes, look, I think we, like everybody, we're trying to tackle it in a different way, and being part of a bigger group does mean you can put in place we have these resources, we have HR teams, we can try and tackle it. And it is a bit harder if you're a smaller indie, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that the smaller indies aren't doing it as well, but having a bit more resource can be.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone is. Everyone is trying to do it. I think it's just a question of, like you say, scale helps potentially. Scale I can imagine it can also be a challenge. I mean, you've got 20 indie labels, I think, Lucinda. So you're managing 20 cultures in a way. Yeah. So yeah. Sorry, Alicia, you wanted to say something?
Sorry, I raised my hand and then realised there was a raise hand button. But I think
I'm old school, raising hands.
I think with the diversity as well is like, obviously, like there was a proportion of people that feel like they were just there to tick boxes, and then we talk about being inclusive, but that also means being inclusive within your group or within your team or within the company, like have discussions, talk, find out about somebody, and just sit them in a corner. And to, like, if you want to work on diversity, it is literally, you have to be consistent. You have to put that extra work in. And I attended an event at the end of last year, and it had the speakers from the US, and they were accessibility coordinators, which is obviously a completely new role, but it gave the opportunity for, like, you know, if anybody had any accessibility issues, you know, it helped ease people in, I suppose potentially like made it more comfortable, more open for people to feel like, you know, they've got a good chance, like they can have a career in TV.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Alicia, if you don't mind, would you just say about your, you know, as a young Black woman entering the industry, I think, did you come through the Channel 4? I think I said you were part of this Channel 4 alumni. So can you just talk a little bit about that, your entry into the industry?
So my so the Channel 4 scheme was specifically that year based around disability, and there were people on the scheme that had all sorts. They had like neuro, they could have like physical, and it was great. If I'm honest, it was really, really great. I was at a company and I really got stuck in. It wasn't till after I left the company and after the scheme had finished that I sort of had a couple of hiccups. And it did make me question. I wasn't that open about my mental health as well, although I'd obviously done the scheme, but I still wasn't comfortable about talking about my mental health. So that limited, I found for myself, that limited me in a way, and it kind of, I didn't feel as comfortable talking about it at other companies as I do now.
Do people feel like they can access these resources, and can they go to them now? What's your
I personally feel like I can access the resources, and I have done, but I think also I'm in a company that's really supportive and really open, and my teams that I work with, like, are just like, they're honestly, they're amazing, and I do feel so comfortable. Like, I never thought I'd be able to do this and be like, oh, I have mental health. Like, it makes all the difference. And I suppose people in short-term contracts as well, they don't get to build that rapport, and, you know, like, get to that, you know, that stage where, you know, you can feel open. And sometimes it could take months. It could take months to build that. But thankfully I don't have.
Yeah, no, and look, thank you very much for speaking on this, because it's not easy, and I think it needs people to actually articulate these things to encourage other people. So, listen, I just wanted to turn to you, and then I just want to open up on a couple of things around diversity and this question around losing talent. But just, I mean, I know that your company has done quite a lot around bringing in more diverse staff, and I think you've invested in training and new roles. I think, maybe you could just talk about what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, obviously we do a lot. I mean, there's a huge amount going on in the industry generally. So I sort of didn't want to make it entirely about Banijay, but, you know, whether it's screen skills, the apprenticeship pilots, all the broadcaster schemes like BBC Elevate and so on, and the Coalition for Change, and you know, BBC's 100 million fund. I mean, there are a lot of initiatives within Banijay. We are investing. We have a scheme called Brightbulb that we actually launched originally under Endemol, like more than 15 years ago. But we've transitioned it into a scheme that it recruits entirely from people from diverse backgrounds. So the first year we've done that is this year. We obviously didn't do it for the last 2 years because of COVID. And included within that, we have a bursary for people relocating into London, because again, we didn't want it to feel like if you weren't living in the capital, you couldn't access a scheme like this. But we also support Mummy Youth, as do many others. We have, you know, in the fast track scheme, we just recently announced a prosthetic makeup program for people from diverse backgrounds. But, you know, all of these schemes, it takes time for people to filter through, and it's not just having an initial scheme, it's about how do you support people on, you know, the next stage of the journey and the next stage, and so on. And that's why I think the fact that the industry is, I mean, these things have been going on for a while, but it feels like there's that added level of momentum now, and all working together on that, so that when people leave, say Banijay or one of our labels, there are other opportunities out there in the marketplace. And I think, you know, what the broadcasters are saying about, you know, making it a sort of commercial priority that you have to have diverse casts and crews, that's vital. I mean, you can't ignore it. So I think it's that joined up approach that's really going to make a difference.
Yeah. Okay. And can I? Thank you for that, Lucinda. And can I bring you in, Alex, on that point, and well, and Philippa as well, because obviously you flagged this question around. You know, we're doing all this. The industry is doing a lot of stuff. That's clear. But at the same time, there's this real risk of losing people and actually losing the very people we're working really hard to attract. I mean, what's your take on that, Alex, based on the kind of survey and where we are on some of those questions?
Yeah, we flagged that up in 2019. It was what we called the revolving door risk, which is the risk that the industry is spending a lot of money on talent attraction. But if you don't really support those people into and through and up in their careers, then you risk that investment and obviously those people disappearing out the other side. What we don't have as an industry is a really good barometer of people leaving. There isn't sort of metric on that, and I think it would be something that'd be really interesting for us to understand better. Is, you know, who is, we all know it anecdotally, I think, but you know, who is it that is leaving and for what reason, so that we can be much more intentional and deliberate about addressing those reasons that people do leave. But I just want to pick up on sort of what both Alicia and Lucinda said, that there's a really clear correlation between that imperative around diversity for the industry and mental health and well-being that I'm not sure is always recognised, because you know, we see a lot of mental health pressures experienced by underrepresented groups because of systemic exclusion, a lack of inclusion, you know, everything that Alicia just spoke about. And that, you know, when it's great, you feel that sense of belonging, you feel that sense of community, you feel supported, you feel appreciated and authentic. All of that, I mean, that's all inclusion, but it's also all well-being as well. So, you know, it's really all one and the same thing that we're talking about. And that's what, you know, I feel really passionately that the work around mental health and well-being is a really critical part of what the industry should be, you know, trying to do around particularly inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. Well. I mean, it's all connected. You can, yeah, completely, isn't it? And Philippa, just picking up on that, I mean, you raised the point. We've got a talent drain of exactly the groups that we're, Alex, revolving door piece. Are you seeing that with your members and in the industry?
Absolutely, most definitely. And I mean, the one area we haven't really touched on at the moment is working parents, parents who work in the industry. You know, it's incredibly difficult if you are working. I've got some statistics here from the Time Project report that people work on average 10 hours per day versus the national average of 7.2. So if you think about how difficult that is for parents, I think one of the areas where the industry is really losing talent is women and people when they become parents, and you know, it's really difficult then to juggle the demands of working in the industry with having a family life. So I think that really the industry does need to think about different ways of working and being more flexible and open to job sharing and flexible working, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, again, this has been kind of discussed quite a lot, but you know, this world in which, you know, which we're now in this sort of limbo in a way, aren't we? We're almost back, but not quite back, but in a way that surely has got some positives, doesn't it? I mean, obviously it's got some negatives as well, but it's got some positives surely for. We certainly are seeing that as a business, flexible and remote working, and people being able to, you know, save a lot of time not traveling necessarily, and hopefully get their work-life balance in a better place. I mean, are we sticking with? Is everybody sticking with this kind of model when we go? Lucinda, sorry, I'm inevitably going to come back to you as the sort of employer on the panel, but you know, is your view that a decent amount of this will stick post post-pandemic, allowing hopefully working parents potentially more flexibility in how they do their jobs?
Yes, I think it will. I think it has to, because everybody expects it to, and therefore, as an employer, I think if you're not responding to the needs of your employees, then well, I don't think I am a working parent myself, and I have really valued the flexibility. I think ultimately it's going to be down to individual teams to figure out what works best for them. There are always situations where it works less well. And I think the flexibility is the key, and it's on both sides. So yeah, I think it will. I hope it will, and I think that's a question not just for our industry but across the economy as a whole. And it's an enormously important way of getting women back into the industry in particular. So certainly we'll be supporting it wholeheartedly.
And we're all fighting for talent now as well. And the thing is, I think it's now built in as an expectation for people that they will expect that. And therefore, if you want great people to come and work for you, you're going to have to give them more flexibility and freedom around their time management. Yeah. So can I turn to something that's the statistics that you flagged up, Alex, at the start around bullying and harassment, which I think we're probably everyone would sort of think it's incredibly challenging and depressing numbers still. There's 57% of respondents saying they'd experienced bullying, sexual or racial harassment or discrimination, or other harassment or discrimination in the past year alone. So the figures still seem shockingly high, given the big debate the industry has had about bullying and culture. And so let me turn to you, Philippa, because obviously the union would be somewhere where I would imagine a lot of people might go when they're experiencing this. I mean, again, is this what are we seeing here? Because it doesn't seem like it's getting any better in many respects.
No, so I think a lot of the pressures that we've already talked about in terms of life during the pandemic and skill shortage, which means that people might progress perhaps before they would have done previously. Those sorts of things are leading to a continuing problem with bullying and harassment across the industry. And I think that the really worrying thing about this particular issue is that there still remains a great nervousness amongst the workforce to report, and that's because of the freelance nature of the industry. So we were involved in a report, the State of Play report with Viva La PD, and the statistics that arose from that report were that 42% of people said that they would be worried about reporting bullying and harassment because of fear of repercussions, what might happen to their careers further down the line. And 32% said that they feared that if they reported, things would get worse and not better. So I think there is a real challenge for the industry around bullying and harassment, and putting in place policies and processes, which means that those issues can be addressed in a very timely and open way, and that actually people do feel supported if they make a report, which clearly they don't at the moment, and it is a huge contributor to people's poor mental health in the industry for sure.
Yeah. Okay. And Alex, you made a point on this, I think, when we talked about this a while back. Last week we talked about a session about the spectrum of this and dealing with it along that spectrum. And could you pick that up? Because I thought that was a
Yeah, well, I agree with what Philippa said. I mean, I think it's a really knotty problem, and it's cultural and it's operational and procedural, and we've got to kind of, I think with bullying and harassment, there isn't a silver bullet answer. There isn't one thing that's going to solve it. We're all going to have to do lots of things to have an impact. So I think it does take all that work on the processes. It also takes culture change, which is much harder to affect, like how you actually build trust. It takes much better support for individuals. But I think it's really important to bear in mind that, I think a lot of what we see in the media are obviously the most egregious and the worst and most horrific cases of bullying and harassment. bullying and harassment can exist on a sort of very everyday basis, and actually that can grind a lot of people down and make their lives really miserable. And that's and that's the stuff that really should be dealt with. That should be able to be either prevented or nipped in the bud really easily and de-escalated. So I think we need to think a bit, in slightly more sophisticated terms about how we do that, how we better equip line managers to deal with it. If someone comes to you and says, I'm not, because often it's really hard to categorize it in your mind, even when you've had those experiences, as being, racism or bullying, harassment. All is that something's made you feel bad. And if someone comes to you and says, I've had this experience, I'm not quite sure what happened, it's making me feel a bit, do you as a line manager feel confident in having that conversation? Or are you the person that goes, oh, they're always a bit like that, or you're probably being oversensitive, or, there's only 2 weeks left on the project, so why didn't you just kind of ride it out? So I think we need to think about, how do we equip line managers to be more aware and more confident in having these conversations? How do we get the leaders at the tops of organisations speaking about this stuff much more openly? Because it happens genuinely, it happens in every workplace, and that's not to condone it in every way, but it happens in every workplace, and we've all dealt with it. So how do we kind of open up those conversations and just build people's confidence? I think of it sometimes as being a bit like, first aid training, where they say any intervention is better than sort of, if someone's collapsed on the street, doing something is better than doing nothing. And I think it's a very similar situation. Doing something and stepping in and responding in a human turn to someone who's had an experience and just trying to help is always going to be the best thing to do. But we've got to support people to be able to do that.
Create a culture in which that dialogue can take place. Alicia, do you have any? Do you want to add to that? I mean, obviously, again, sorry, I'm kind of coming to you as the person at the sharp end all the time, because you're the production practitioner on this call. But I mean, in the heat and fire of actually delivering these, do you feel like it's possible to go down those routes if necessary?
We have to hold people accountable, and in order to do that, there's usually a process of having an investigation. Obviously, it's if people feel comfortable to come forward, and we have to be able to hold people accountable. We have to kind of trust in the process of an investigation if we need to. Although obviously saying that, it's always easier said than done, isn't it?
It's always easier said than done. Of course. I think it's always easier said than done. It is just doing everything I think that people can do to promote a culture where it is acceptable. It is expected actually that people can come and voice their concerns and have different channels in which they can go through to actually raise issues.
I do think this, obviously you say with the channels and raising issues, but I do think with line managers, that is one of the reasons why they're there. So in terms of having somebody, they need somebody to talk to, they've got contact numbers for that, Samaritans and stuff, but in particularly bullying and harassment, they need to be able to go to line managers, or if they can't go to the line manager, go to somebody who, somebody that they're comfortable going with, and where the process can be started in-house, because in-house is where the issue is, or maybe.
And then just before we kind of, there's a couple of questions in it we'll come to, but just before we come to that, there isn't a broadcaster on the panel. I know the broadcasters have supported this panel and helped produce it, but there isn't a broadcaster on the panel. They obviously play a massive role in this, and actually this is about film as well. So I suppose it's fundamentally about who funds productions, but the broadcasters have the structure and they have the kind of infrastructure, but they're clearly an important part of this, aren't they? Because they have to. It's often the conversation is you're working with ridiculous expectations, so you have to have the correct expectations, the correct budgets, a sort of fair expectation of what's going to happen. And I mean, Philippa, Lucinda, maybe you could just respond to that, your view.
Yeah, absolutely. Broadcasters do have a responsibility, and on the whole, they're engaged in the conversation about how to make the industry better for those that work within it. As Lucinda has said, conversations through things like the Coalition for Change have been really positive, but I guess that tension is always going to exist between the budgets and what happens on the actual production, and there are tensions around that. So yes, everybody probably does have to be a little bit more realistic to enable good practice to take place. And actually it is really crucial, because we keep talking about this skills shortage. At the end of the day, people are going to want to work for production companies who treat them well and give them flexibility and support them in their mental health and don't allow bullying and harassment to happen on their productions. So it's got to be in the industry's interest to turn this situation around.
And Lucinda,
I completely agree. I mean, we can put in place all of the, sort of unconscious bias, wellness training, harassment training, all of those things for line managers, as both Alicia and Alex have said. But ultimately, if you're working to a schedule that is, unrealistically tight, or a budget that's unrealistically tight, it just puts incredible strain on everybody. Now, I'm not saying that responsibility sits solely with broadcasters. It sits with us as producers as well, to try and work within the budgets that we've been set. But inevitably, that does just lead to, stress. So it's like we've been saying the whole way along, it has to be joined up in every way. But on the other hand, I'd say that what broadcasters are doing around putting in place those sort of very bold requirements for diversity and representation on screen are really important, like I said earlier, because it does make it a commercial imperative. So there's so many great examples of where we are working hand in glove, but that point about schedules and budgets is really important.
And this might be unrealistic, but is it one of those things where it would be great if there was a kind of almost like a mental health or mental well-being line in a budget, where you'd be saying, okay, that we need to allow X for this, and these things will fall under it, but it goes into the budget? Or could you ever see that happening, Lucinda?
Yeah, look, I mean, there are conversations going on around that, and actually, Dragonfly recently produced the Then Barbara Met Alan, which is a docudrama about Barbara and Alan, the people behind the Direct Action Network, who fundamentally changed how disability is thought about in the UK. And they had an incredible setup of a team of a very large level of representation of people from a disabled background, both on and off screen. And there were some incredible lessons that were learned from that. And there was there were a lot of challenges in doing it, but Dragonfly have pulled together a report of all of those lessons and recommendations for the industry, including things like access coordinators and list of accessible facilities and training schemes and so on. So I think if we can keep sharing lessons like that, and that's a very specific case around disability, but if we can share those lessons and including things like that, then yes, absolutely.
One of the things that I'm always interested in is, although I've never experienced it myself, but people go to Australia and work in TV, and they say it's so much different. The lifestyle is so much different. The work life and personal life balance is completely different. Why is that? Is it because they have more money? Like they're clearly doing something in terms of like having the work-life balance and the scheduling. So they're clearly doing something.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It is an interesting point, isn't it? I mean, it's a super intense, competitive market, the UK, isn't it? I mean, I don't know the Australian market well enough, but the one thing you do know about the UK is it's incredibly intense, and
we do have shorter runs of series as well, which I think you still have the same level of setup complexity and setup costs of a production, whether it's running for 6 episodes or 46 episodes. So I think that contributes a bit as well.
Okay, right. So there's a couple of questions in, just to Lucinda. You're on the receiving end of one of them. So a question for Lucinda. Further to a flexible working issue, what can a company like Banijay, with sound structures in place and without the insecurities of smaller indies, do about giving people longer contracts which will address the precarity of freelancers? Should Banijay be setting a precedent, for example, asking for longer schedules to avoid worker burnout? Long hours punish people. So can Banijay make a job sharing, working from home, part-time roles and hybrids, therefore a prerequisite to improve diversity and mental well-being? So a lot of points, but I think fundamentally, can you use your scale and your position in the market to make it a better place to work?
I think that's a really good point, and we are doing it to an extent. We do it informally, in the sense that we do try and offer people long-term contracts. We do try and, even if it's not a long-term contract, when people are coming out of a production, we're trying to work with them to find something else within the group, because honestly that works for us as well when we've got some great talent. Our 12-month inclusion fast track program that I mentioned earlier for diverse talent, we're paying to put people on 12 months contracts, even if we don't know what that next job's going to be, and we're including within that mentoring and training, and other sort of forms of development. So we are doing some of it. I'm not saying for a second that we're doing everything that we could do, and I think what we're very aware of is that where there is a talent crunch, as we have at the moment, being able to attract and retain the best talent makes sense for us, but I'm also really aware that that isn't what everybody wants. So being able to target the people who want that and will benefit from it is our biggest priority. Okay, all right, thank you. And then a great question. Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it is the key question in a way, isn't it? What can people do? So, and then the same question is also given us a piece of information saying Australia, in response to your point, Alicia, they monitor and regulate hours, and a bridge dancer. So I think that's what he said, and a bridge dancer. So I think what he says is they just have more regulated working hours, and they clearly enforce them in order for them to do that. So. And there's been another question asking about the various schemes. Again, Lucinda asking about the scheme that you run about to encourage more diverse entry candidates or people coming through. Where can people find out about that? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry. Either email myself directly, so it's lucinda.hicks@banijayuk.com, or our HR department, and they'll be able to provide all the information on all of those schemes. Yeah, and then I think the film and TV charity is probably quite a good place to go to as a sounding board for other things that might be available, Alex, rather than, I'm not sure that there's one single
I mean, for support for individuals, our website, through our website, you can access our freelancer wellbeing hub, which is a repository of nuggets of advice and information. You can always call our support line, which is 0800 054 0000, and you can access all our services through that as well. And they will refer into a lot of mental health support, including counselling. And we also have a bullying advice service run by the wonderful Justine, who is trained to be able to support people who've experienced bullying or harassment as well. Okay, all right, fine. And then one other question. So Philippa and Lucinda were talking earlier about supporting women and working mothers, but maternity policies in production companies tend to fall way behind other media companies. Is this something that needs to be addressed? So is that true, Lucinda, would you say? Maternity policies in production companies are poorer than other? I don't know if that's factually true, but it is something that we're actually looking at the moment. I mean, I have 3 very young children, so it's something that's close to my heart. So yes, I think it's a fair thing to raise, and it's certainly something we're thinking about at the moment. Philippa, do you want to make any comment on that?
Yes, it's an incredibly difficult environment, isn't it? Particularly if you're a freelancer, then there is very little maternity support. So, yeah, I think there are real challenges around that.
But again, I mean, if you look at the other way, that as we keep saying, there's a battle for talent going on. So, exactly. Hopefully some of these things will be responses to trying to get great people in and help them to come into your businesses and give them that kind of flexible working and support. So we're almost at the end. Very briefly, I'm going to have to ask you to be very brief to maybe each of you just give one positive. That there's a lot of challenges. We know that. We've spent an hour talking about them, but something that you can see coming out of either the survey or the industry that you think is a positive, and that it's a good position for us to build off. So, Alicia, would you mind if I start with you on that?
Yeah, of course. Positive. There is change, and being open is beneficial. Not just for myself, but for other people on my team as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Philippa, don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, a positive is, as I said earlier, I think that there's an awful lot of collaboration going on across the industry, lots of people campaigning to try and make the industry a better place to work. But I'm just going to shout out the Bectu welfare policy in this respect, which we launched last week, which I think if people take a look at that and adopt some of the things in there, that would certainly improve things.
And Lucinda?
Yeah, look, I think, I understand why people feel like there's a lot of talk, but I actually disagree. I don't think it is all talk. I think we are pushing in place more support on productions around well-being, crew, participant care. It's far more at the forefront, and is, as we said earlier, is a budgeted line item on some shows as well. So I think we are moving in the right direction.
Okay, and Alex, finally, start with you.
Yeah, I mean, despite everything I've said, I'm really optimistic because I do think, all the conversations I sit in at the moment, particularly with production companies, I think people really want to be able to do the right thing. They just haven't known often where to start, like what to do. And one of the things that we've been developing with producers and broadcasters and freelancers as part of the whole pitch program work is this toolkit for mentally healthy productions. And it's a really super practical resource for productions to make sure that their productions are mentally healthy. And yeah, I mean, everyone we speak to is just unbelievably enthusiastic about it, which I find incredibly exciting and encouraging.
Okay, well, look, I mean, as like I say, we write an enormous amount about this, and I can't think of a time where the industry has been doing more, recognizes the problems, but is absolutely trying to address them. And again, I think we'd all recognize you have to keep doing more and more and more, and it doesn't happen as quickly as anyone would like, but there's definitely momentum there. And the survey is a great reminder of just how far we've got to go, but it's good to have some positives. I think there are a couple of questions that we didn't get around to and a couple of comments. One comment, Lucinda, was, could you put your email in the chat, because you gave it so quickly they couldn't get it down. But again, I think if anybody's got anything they want to pick up, again, either with the RTS or with Film and TV Charity, then they can be reached directly. I think we're there and we're running out of time. So apologies for the technical hiccup midway through. I hope everyone rejoined who was originally with us. Thank you very much for the panel. Alex, Lucinda, Philippa, Alicia, and your comments and contribution. And thank everyone for joining us. And hopefully we'll do this again with the next Looking Glass, and we'll see more progress, which is what everyone wants. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Connor. Thanks, everyone.